Well, hello, everyone. I hope you're all very well, and thank you very much for spending your time with us today. I can hear some translation in the room, but we'll sort this out. So my name is Savas Verdis. I'm the co-director of executive programs at LSE Cities that is hosting tonight's event entitled From Childhood Needs to Urban Reality, Strategies to Engage Kids in Urban Design. So I hope you're all in the right place. This event is part of the Urban 95 Academy, which is one of the executive custom programs at LSE Cities that my colleagues Katie Beck and Marie Kaune run on behalf of LSE Cities. And this is an initiative that has been running for over 3 years with the support of our core partner, the Van Leer Foundation. And this is very much an opportunity. It's a capacity building program for senior urban leaders globally to transition their space, their cities, for the benefits of young children and their caregivers. To this date, over 200 cities have engaged in the program. It's an amazing effort. Over 36 mayors have gone through the program, both through an online education method, but also in person. And today, in this room, we are joined by the good company of our 5th cohort of cities. And we have representations from Australia, Brazil, Colombia, El Salvador, Guatemala, Italy, Oman, Pakistan, and South Africa. So it's truly a global mix of participants. Now, I would first like to thank the Van Leer Foundation that has funded this initiative for the last 3 years. Andrea, you must be somewhere in the audience, Vicky, Sam, Rushta and Michael, who are not here, and the early instigator of this program that I always thank, a former student of ours, Cecilia Vaca-Jones, who was a former executive director of the Van Leer Foundation. I never forget her inspiration in setting this up. Now, the good news is that we're in the process of securing another 3 years in this program with the Van Leer Foundation, which is amazing. And here is my sales pitch. For those cities that want to apply and engage in this program, which is fully funded, please visit www.urban95academy.org. And that's as much as I will be a salesman tonight. Now, it is in this program, in the Urban 95 Academy, that the question of how do you engage young children often comes up. And we tell our participants, well, we can introduce you to people who can help us. And some of these people are actually here today, and we're very privileged to have 3 amazing speakers that will contribute some of their insights and practice into this debate. And how do we engage young children? We have a specific and narrow focus by young children, meaning 0 to 5-year-olds. So this will be the context that we will be pushing today. Now, we will use this session quite instrumentally to collect ideas, both from the speakers, but also from the audience and those online, to shape our thinking, because we are in the process of designing a new online session for the Academy on engaging young children. So please influence our chat if you're online with ideas, what we're getting right, what we're forgetting. This will all be used in our design process for thinking about a new course. Now, our key entry point for tonight is a preview. It's like a premiere in film terms of an upcoming publication by the Global Designing Cities Initiative called How to Engage Kids in Street Design. That will be presented today by Francisca Benitez. And Francisca, thank you so much for being here, is a program manager with GDCI, and she oversees street design implementations in multiple countries and focus specifically on early childhood development. And of course, the focus on streets is very exciting. We're not only talking about public spaces or green parks or playgrounds, because streets are very contested spaces. And we'll be discussing some of these issues later. Now, to discuss and respond to some of Francisca's ideas, we have 2 panelists, Silvia Amoros, who is an architect and urban planner, and the deputy head of area regeneration for the London Borough of Waltham Forest, that was recently awarded an £8 million levelling up fund to improve the area around Chimford Mound and Hyams Park. Silvia is also an alumna of the Urban 95 Academy, so very familiar with the green colors and the audience that we are here today. And finally, welcome to Joanna Dabaj, who is the co-founder of Catalytic Action, a charity that works to empower vulnerable children, youth, and their communities through participatory built interventions. Joanna is an architect and researcher whose recent work revolves around working closely with displaced and host communities in Lebanon to co-design inclusive research and built interventions. So hopefully we can get some global views into these challenges. The format for this evening is Francisca will present for 20 minutes, guided by her time clock here. This will be followed by a 30-minute panel discussion with Silvia as well as Joanna, and finally a 30-minute Q&A with all of you both online and also in the room. The event is being recorded and will be made available soon on the LSE events website. So without further ado, can we all welcome Francisca, and the floor is yours.
Great. Hi again to those who I saw this afternoon. Thank you, Savas, and thank you everyone for having me today. And as we were saying, I think I need to click right. You gave me the instructions and I'm already. We'll speak today about a subject that is very dear to my heart. We've been developing a guide at the Global Designing Cities Initiative and as similar as your course, it's not ready yet. It should be ready in about a month, but we're still welcoming all your questions, all your debates. So please give us the hard questions. We want to make this as useful as possible. And as I mentioned to some of you earlier, I'm the crazy street lady, right? We love streets at Global Designing Cities Initiative. After I gave you the presentation, actually, I was taking a walk. I entered the Transportation Museum store. And I was telling you before that I have sometimes trouble explaining to my friends and families about why I like streets so much, these gray spaces in cities. And I was looking at toys. I have a 1-year-old, and all the toys are cars, right? He's crazy about cars right now. And that makes me a little bit anxious, I have to say. So I go into stores with him and he looks at all the cars and I'm asking like, do you have other mobility choices that I can offer my kid? Like, do you have a bike or a scooter or anything will do? I'm thinking about changing a little bit now. Maybe I'll buy him a red bus. It's public transport after all. I think we can advocate for public transport, so I'll go for that. But as I was saying before, just very crazy about streets. And I think that is because we do see it as the largest continuous space of public space in our cities. So if we walk around, as we're mentioning, if we're in a new city, I think that does reflect a lot. It reflects the health, it can reflect the education, it reflects a lot of what we have in cities. But of course, this is why it's hard to explain it, because many of our streets do look like this, and they haven't really been designed for people, right? They're mostly designed for cars and let alone for children. This is a little bit of a summary of why I think it's not only an opportunity, but it's really a need of why we need to design better streets for kids. And when I say kids, I say their caregivers, I say their families, so the whole ecosystem of kids. So it's not really because I'm the crazy street lady that wants to ride her bike. I think there is an urgency of creating better streets all over the world, and we need to take care of this. As I was saying before, I'm part of the Global Designing Cities Initiative. We are lucky enough to work with many cities in many countries and be inspired by them. We have 4 different programs. I'm part of the Streets for Kids program, and where we do things like this, right? So this is one of our recent projects in Cuenca in Ecuador with our great partners from Huasipichanga. I see Vicky smiling. I know you're very familiar with it. And we do different techniques. So even if it's just a little bit of paint to make them safer, to reclaim some of the space, and maybe transform the streets from what I showed you earlier, that are full of cars, to places like this, right, that are more playful, that are better for caregivers and their families in general. Today, we're here to discuss our newest upcoming publication about how to engage kids in street design. I'm gonna follow my friend Savas here and be a saleswoman for 1 second, but just to mention that all of these resources are available online. They're available to download for free and in multiple languages, so hopefully there are resources that can help you in your work. And this is what we're discussing here today. Even the cover is up for discussion, so that's how open I want you to think about this conversation. So more than designing streets for kids, we've been trying to involve kids in the designing of their streets. So not just us as experts. We know that we can't probably ask a kid where they want the crosswalk, but we do want to know their experience, where they feel unsafe, what they want to do, what are their priorities for the streets, what types of activities they would like to do outside, what activities they can't do outside because they don't feel they have the opportunity to do so. I wanted to start by a very, very quick survey, and I think the people who are online, you can do it too. And actually, I need to, I don't have how to access it. It's fine. We won't do it. That's fine. I think we will have a technical issue. We'll do it later. I just, maybe we'll do a raise of hands instead. Let's go analog. Who in the room has done kids engagement before? That's about half the room here, at least, right? That's pretty impressive. And I'm gonna ask you then, if you were to describe kids engagement in one word, what would you say? And please speak up, because if not, I'll wear my teacher hat and I'll call out to the people who raise their hands. I know who you are.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
How can you describe kids engagement in one word? Good or bad? Or
Fun.
Fun. Great.
Surprise.
Surprise. Amazing.
Imaginative.
Imaginative.
Creative. Challenge.
I was waiting for the challenging part, right? It's hard sometimes. It's surprising in good and bad ways, right? It takes us outside of our comfort zones. So today I'm going to speak to you about our research. Again, this is my first time presenting it, so I really struggled to see how much or what of our research I was going to present to you. To Katie's tranquility, I think I've narrowed it down. It will only be 15 more minutes. I know it's a long presentation, but if you go outside and you take 3 things out of this conversation, or this presentation at least, I want you to know, like, why should we do it? How can we do it? And to know that it can be challenging, but it's not impossible, and it doesn't need to be challenged necessarily. And what to do next, right? Many times we do it, and then we sit down at our desk, we have a pile of very fun drawings, and we don't know what to do with them later. So starting with the why, I think we all can agree that it must have some benefits for kids, right? We include their voices, we hear what they have to say, we learn about their experience, they became more aware of their environment, we can teach them some things, they can even become, hopefully later, more informed, more engaged adults in the future. By end results, I think that it has benefits for caregivers, because we also learn about their experience. Kids are rarely alone on the streets. We learn about their needs, and we all know when one kid goes home and he starts talking about it, and they go back also and they can relate about their experiences. We think it has benefits for the community. We do believe, and we say it all the time, that streets that are good for kids are good for everyone. If we design a street that is safe, it has a safe crossing for a kid, it's probably safe for us as adults too. And then, as you may be interested to, I know many of you are city leaders and working in your municipalities. You'll go back and you'll have to convince your city staff why it's important to do it. How can you do it? Why do you invest time in actually engaging kids? I think to that point, my main mindset right now is that we've all seen very beautiful parks around the world, right? Lots of investment, very colorful, the latest technology. And then you take a kid and he's playing in the side with a little bit of sand. So I think that's fine. I think that's amazing, actually. But if you're a city, you don't want to make these huge investments for kids to play with something they already had, or be making investments in things that they don't really need. I think kids also give us the benefit, and I'm sure you've discussed this a little bit these days, of making allies that wouldn't necessarily be our allies before. Maybe we can talk to the health department. Maybe we can make it some more creative, as you were saying, and talk to an arts department. So it gives us another opportunities to find new partners to support our projects too. So I think if we engage them from the beginning, and the kids go back to their houses and they engage their parents and they engage their communities, maybe we can have projects that have better outcome overall. And in the end, I think it could have, I'm not saying it always has, but it could have benefits for the environment too. I'm sure if you have nephews, nieces, we've seen how more involved, how more conscious they are. I keep being taught by them. So I think if we really think about projects that are good for kids, in the end, they could be good for the environment. And even though it's not linear, we love graphs, right? And we know that in reality, this goes all over the place. But if we think about it in some sort of way and linear way, we can expect that if we have projects that are good for kids, where we engage them, they're good for communities, they're good for city leaders, they're good for the environment, then they're good for the next generation too. Now how, right? I think that's maybe the hard part, or maybe how to convince is the hard part. When I started doing this, and also a little bit about myself, my background is in design. So I wanted to be very creative. I wanted to say, okay, you're someone from a city, be very creative, go and ask kids about anything, do a theater play or do something. And then I realized that's not really helpful, right? We'll have limited time, limited resources. So we need to be practical, we need to be actionable. And maybe we can be creative. I'm not saying we don't, but what we try to create is something that you can actually see and take it. And even if you implement one session and one drawing, or you want to do a 6-month curriculum, it could be good and it could be engaging. So we have defined some tips. I know there are lots of tips everywhere, but hopefully these are tips that could be helpful. Again, if you're doing one drawing and you're going to print one template, go to one classroom, or if you want to build a curriculum around streets and engaging kids. The first thing I think we do need to acknowledge is that we're working with children, and that's different from adults, right? So we do need to be inclusive from the beginning. We do need to be respectful. If a kid doesn't want to engage, maybe they have less tools to express that than we as an adult. So we need to respect that. We need to give them their space. We need to be transparent about what we're doing, even though they're kids. And I'm saying kids, but again, it could be a teenager. They do feel that. And I think we need to be honest. We need to be transparent if we're expecting that from them too. And obviously there are some rights that need to be protected. So we do talk about that. And I think we need to start with that basis in general. Then about identifying the right partners. I think everyone knows as small kids, and I said this before, but I think everyone knows that very rarely a small kid is alone. They have a whole ecosystem of people around them. So how can we engage not only kids, but how do we get through them? Who are their trusted people? Who could get us to engage with the kids better? And then identifying the kids too. So again, I think it's very different if we're trying to engage a baby or we're trying to engage a teenager. For a baby, we'll probably focus more on caregivers. For teenagers, we have the opportunity of giving them more responsibility. Maybe they actually become the facilitators of their own activities. We try to make this a continuum. We know that maybe one 6-year-old will have different abilities and will be more similar to a 12-year-old in some ways, to a 3-year-old in other, but just making it very actionable again. So if you're going to school, if you're going somewhere, you have some guidance of how to implement different tools with different kids of different ages. This is my preach, I'd say. I am a broken record about this. And I think we really need to define the purpose and the expected outcomes from the beginning. I don't care if the expected outcome or the purpose of the activity is just the activity. I think that is a goal in itself. So if the goal is just going and talking to the kids about streets, about cities, and that's the main goal, I think that's amazing and that's great. But we need to define it, because if the goal is getting design insights, maybe the tools will be different, maybe the questions we'll ask will be different, the resources we need are different. So And again, it doesn't need to be too hard. It's just before we do the activity, we ask ourselves, what do we want to get out of this? What are we expecting to receive from the kids? So we have created different tools. And again, just giving you a sneak peek of some of the things we've created so you can get an idea of what to expect later. We have created some tools, and I want to say we're not the first to engage kids. We know there are lots of amazing tools. We have some panelists here that also have lots of amazing tools. I think our main contribution right now is that we've adapted them a little bit specifically to street design. So many of these have been inspired by experts in our fields, by things that we've been doing, but these are specifically targeted at what if you have a street design project or you want to create awareness around an issue that's around street design, maybe air quality, or you want to go to school and you want to talk about kids about streets. You don't have to be as crazy as I, but maybe you would want to do that at some point in your life. There are tools for different ages, tools from different stages of a project too, and just trying to be, as I was saying before, very comprehensive. So giving instructions, the age group, we have templates, so making it as easy as possible. If you want to be more creative, that's amazing. If you have less time, you can really follow some instructions, and hopefully this will help you. Just again, a sneak peek of some of the things that we do. So again, recommendations for different ages, even some questions that you could ask during the activity to spur your imagination. But even though we spent a lot of time and it was really fun creating the tools, I think it really isn't about the tool. You could do one drawing and it could be very meaningful, or you could do a whole session of different things and it could be very superficial. This drawing, I love it. It was when we were starting to engage kids, and we asked a kid, I think a very common question, to draw a street that made them feel unsafe. And he drew a street full of monsters, which I think is very valid, right? He followed the instructions. I would feel very unsafe in a street full of monsters. And while that is great, it doesn't really give us the insights we were looking for, right? Or it doesn't give, it's a missed opportunity for what we were trying to engage them with. So the next time we did a GDCI presentation, and if you've seen some of our photos or the ones I showed at the beginning, they're very colorful. So that for that session, if you see some of the kids draw very colorful streets. And again, I think that's fine if the goal or the purpose was to raise awareness, to show the kids that their streets could be different. But if we're trying to learn about their experiences, maybe this was a bit too far, right? Maybe we influenced them too much. So just trying to find the right balance of how to ask the right questions, when to ask the right questions, and how to engage them in a meaningful way so we can learn about their experience in the streets and what they want to have in the future. We have some recommendations. For example, I was telling someone before, we've learned that introductory activities are very important, even if it's a 5-minute storytelling about streets. So they have the idea that, or cities, that we're going to talk about cities and streets and not monsters. So again, just trying to give some practical tools, being flexible, obviously, is very important, of how to get this meaningful engagement. And again, this is today, maybe not in a year, well, always, but today even more is open for discussion. So I'd love to know your thoughts and your questions. So I want you to imagine that you did the engagement, right? We went there, we engaged with the kids, we talked with them for a little bit at the beginning, we gained some of their trust. We did an introductory presentation about what was the possibilities in street. They were very engaged. It was great. They did the drawing. We're even flexible. We realized that they had a lot of energy, so we had to take them outside and play a game so they can like release some energies again, like, and coordinate that into our timeline. But we did that and we had a great time. Everyone was very excited. What do we do next, right? It was a great fun day. It was exhausting. It was a little bit chaotic, a little bit stressful. But what do we do next? This, I think, is one of my main learnings in general. And I think, again, up for debate depending on the goal of the project. But I think we really need to focus on the experience that kids have on street more than in the actual elements. We go a lot and ask them, what do you like? What don't you like? Do you like the bench? Don't you like the bench? So to visualize this, if a kid said, I want big concrete separators, for example, if he said it or drew it, or we learned that through one of the engagements, we would probably start designing something like this, right? We'll think big concrete separators, they feel unsafe, there's something in the street, they want to be like protected somehow. We might even make it more visual, engage them in painting the separators. But if we ask them what they like to do outside or what their experience is, maybe we would learn that it was something like this, right? So it didn't have anything to do with safety. It was just something playful. They were making the most of their elements. So if we ask about the experience, maybe instead of designing this, we could start doing things like this that are more aligned with what kids were wanting or expecting, more colorful. Influencing design, I think it's very tricky. And now I'm going to be my own devil's advocate. I think what we gain from kids is very, very important. I also want to say that in the end, we should be the adults, and it's not the only information that we're getting. So there's something that we learned through the kids' engagement, but there's also other things that we gain from other types of information. So there are, if we're designing a street, we know there are databases, we know there's online research, we can do other data collection, and the kids' engagement is one part of this whole ecosystem. So again, playing my own devil's advocate, I don't want to say it's less valuable, it's just I just want to paint a full picture. I love this is from one of our partners in Solo. So I do think that in general, in the end, we're not asking the kids, where do you want to put the crossing? That would be very risky. They're kids, even if they're teenagers, maybe they have a little bit. But we are the adults in the end. We should be some sort of experts in our little field. And we should be able to interpret that into some street design elements or strategies or something that makes it relate to their experience. So we have the information we know. We have what we learned from the kids, and what we're proposing again is to take all this drawing, these maps, these photos. We are proposing one method is a method, there might be others, but to transform this into insights, right? To understand the drawings and maybe see what are the locations, what are the challenges, what are the activities that kids are doing right now, what are the activities that kids would like to do in the future. And then we reconvene and say, okay, we have all this information. What are some street design elements we can propose? What are some programs? What are some policies, hopefully, for the future? Then maybe if we're at a point where we have the design, I'm not saying we can't ever ask them about the elements. Maybe we can ask them, do you like the red bench or the yellow bench? But I think asking them directly that at the beginning is missing an opportunity of learning what they actually want or their experiences in the streets. And again, we're proposing a method, but this is not scientific data. So trying to make it a little bit compelling, we can mix it with the actual photos. We can analyze the drawings that are very powerful. The quotes are powerful too. We can mix it with information that we know. In the end, what we want to do is really understand kids' experiences in the street. Understand also their aspirations, what they would like to be doing in the street. Maybe they even didn't know it was a possibility. Maybe these are things they did outside, but because of their streets, they didn't imagine it. Maybe gain some support for a project. I think that's very important too. So we can engage them at different stages and have projects with positive outcomes for everyone. So probably not this, right? It could be positive in some sort of situation. In this example, it wasn't, but something that looks more like this. And again, broken record, but I do think that the streets that are good for kids are really good for everyone in the community and their families. Thank you. I'm going to leave that up for a second, just if you want to first sign up to know about the publications. And then I will be very open to say that, obviously, and you know this, it is hard to convince people to do this type of work. So if you do have positive outcomes that you want to share, if you have a case study that you want to be highlighted, this is also a good opportunity to be included in the guide. So you can do that through that link. Thank you.
Thank you, Francisca. Please join us.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop share and I'll share this on the Zoom chat.
Thank you.
Good. Well, Francisca, thank you so much for the inspiring work and for giving us such a structured also presentation. And perhaps we can have an opportunity, we may have an opportunity to engage both from the why elements that you presented at the beginning and also the how. That was, I think, quite interesting. And if we start with the why, it would be interesting just to get Joanna's and Sylvia's take on this, right? And just being, a devil's advocate of why do this in the first place, right? With respect of, really thinking, what adults like us might think is right for a kid and a young child. Remember, we're looking at the 0 to 5 versus what kids have been telling you in your work. And I guess this is the kind of the boundaries of a child's imagination that is unbounded versus interpreted by our biases. And maybe, Johnny, you can tell us a bit more about this.
Yeah, thank you. So I think engaging kids is very important for the multiple impacts that it brings, not only to the children, but also to the project in itself and to its sustainability. So as adults or designers, I would say we can assume many things that we know about children's experiences or what they really need. So for example, if you're designing, I would give the example of the playground because it's the easiest. Maybe as a designer, they would come and they would design, is this slide used to swing, they will play and it will be fun. But actually, some children's experiences are different and the types of play and the way they want to play together in this specific context is very different than our own ideas as designers and urban practitioners. And we need to listen to learn about the experiences that you mentioned in the presentation. Is super important because we need to learn about the experience, the culture, the existing social relationship that exists, and design the interventions accordingly. And when we speak about the sustainability of a project, if we design something for kids with our own assumption, we might do something that actually fails, an urban intervention that people don't use, people vandalize, kids themselves, they would destroy it because it doesn't represent their own needs or aspirations, or it just doesn't work in that specific context. So I think despite needing lots of initial investment to engage them, I think it's super important to engage them and to listen to the children.
But can I ask in terms of an example from some of your work when you've been in one sense taken back? And this is, sometimes with kids, when you spend time, you're just confounded with a completely different reality. I mean, I love the kind of monsters on the street, right? I mean, potentially it's completely outside of our, box of possibility.
Yeah.
But to what extent can this push us and influence the way that we interpret, what the needs are?
Hala, I think it's very important to be transparent from the beginning, not to raise false expectations as well when you're designing with children. So I think you avoid being in that position if from the beginning you're clear about the project goals and the capacity of the project itself, because we've worked in contexts where we have very limited budgets to do an intervention. So we don't have the flexibility, for example, to make a swimming pool, even though that might appear a lot in that it's something that they all like, or a water feature that we know the municipality will never maintain and it will fail eventually. So I think to avoid being in that situation, you need to be very open and very transparent from the beginning with the children and the community. And you don't come in as, I'm coming to change everything for the best and I know it's all. No, you come to listen and to actually learn from them and know what you're capable to do and to change, not pretend that you're going to solve all the problems at once.
Okay.
Definitely, when you engage with adults or children, you get a different outcome completely. In our case, for example, when we engage with especially elderly people, they are against children congregating in certain areas. Their false belief is that children should be in parks and not in town centers.
Right.
And then when you talk with children, children and young people mainly, they think that the town centers, that there is nothing for them, and they would like to be there, but there are no shops, no benches, no places where to gather, and they want to be there. So we think that all places are for everyone, and we are trying to design parks in a way that everyone has something to do there. Even elderly people have their gym equipment, and then we try to design town centers that are playgrounds in there. But there is also something very familiar, I'm sure, with all of you about this silo, the way we work in silos. Sometimes here what happens is that parks, the team of parks is the one that are implementing the play areas just in parks and not in the highway one. So there are some functionality.
And we could also bring Francisca when we're trying to access, kids, and what is our entry point? So you mentioned this, Francisca, in terms of who might be your routes or your bridges into the stakeholders that you're targeting, and you mentioned the caregivers, schools, teachers, head teachers, and I guess in the same way, if we're looking to engage children in their capacity for, I'm not sure it's about freedom, it's what they are ideal or want to kind of express. How useful or not useful have some of these interpreters been? So I just narrow-minded. I can imagine the head teacher of my kid's school not being a very kind of interesting entry point in terms of openness, right? And having a specific vision of what works and what doesn't work for a kid that is 5 years old.
Well, the comment that we always say we need to be the most careful with is when we ask kids, and I will get to your question, but I think it's related. When we ask kids about parking, so we get lots of quotes about there's too much parking in the street. And then we say, okay, this is a negative aspect because we want to change parking. But in the end, we understand that kids maybe like parking because they've heard their teachers, their parents, and someone else. So just being very mindful about that. I think it's a mix, really. I'd be lying if I said there's one specific person. I just say that I think in general, we will be the outsiders. So even if the educator or the teacher isn't the most child-friendly cities or advocating, or she wants to buy lots of cars, she does have some of the trust of the kids. So there's a balance to be made there, right? So maybe we do need to start engaging with her first. We do have a section about facilitating or training the facilitators and trying to get their support first. But there's something I think more important and more complicated to gain that to advocate for street is gain the kids' trust. So a 5-year-old, a 4-year-old, they'll be in their environment, they'll be comfortable. So I wouldn't disregard someone because they don't have the same exact views. Maybe the whole process and the engagement will be something enlightening for them too. So in the end, we're not only engaging the kids, we're engaging the bigger ecosystem.
That's very good. Jana, in your work in Lebanon, working in some of the communities, has this come up and you kind of entering the kind of, the space through a specific set of stakeholders change the outcomes?
Yeah, for sure. So the facilitators play a key role in the kind of results you might get from a participatory approach. And definitely the trust is key, but also the relationship of the facilitator with the children. So of course, if it's a project or community that we've been working with for a long time, it's very different than if we're coming to a new community. Then we definitely need to work with someone who already works with the children, such as schools, scouts, or another NGO that's working with the children. And really, it's super important, the facilitation, because it's very important not to diminish the children's opinion, for example, and adults tend to do that a lot, or even if you do, that alone will ruin the whole participation process. Like if you think what they're saying is less important, so training the facilitator is key, but at the same time, we try to do the facilitation together with the partner organization or the school teachers that we're working with. And I think it is very important for a meaningful, and the results can change drastically because they can really impose ideas. So one thing we say when we're designing play, not to propose anything yourself, like basketball, football,
yes.
Because they might want to sit together, and that's for them the kind of play to chat. While if the facilitator starts suggesting football, you end up, and we've been there, you end up having all the drawings of football, and the girls, for example, if it's a girls and boys session, they they feel intimidated, they don't even express. So I think it's super important, the facilitation and how you
Very nice.
approach it and how you design it based on what you can do within this project.
So trust, training with perhaps as facilitators,
Yeah.
a key entry point. Sylvia, do you want to add this?
Yes, I think it's very important flexibility. So activities
Yeah.
need to be very flexible,
Yeah.
adaptable to different ages and different maturities. Yeah, every child is different, and sometimes you are really shocked about how mature they are, and they are like natural architects. Sometimes that is
Yeah.
like, oh, I cannot believe that your parents are not architects, and because you really are really impressed with their insights, and that's really important. Then it needs to be something genuine, something that you are asking questions but not giving the answers. And maybe at the beginning you need a little bit of upskilling. You need to explain basic vocabulary that we usually explain about public realm, these kind of things that they cannot understand what public realm is. And then you can explain in a very simple way, it's a space between buildings, no matter if it's the road, if it's a square, the street, everything is between buildings. So that really, they start building this vocabulary and simple concept as for example, the relation between the width of the street and the heights of the buildings, and simple urbanistic concepts that they can start building their vocabulary and underpin in some way put their opinions with a little bit more of vocabulary that really makes them feel
Very
more
good.
empowered
Yeah.
to explain what they think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We should definitely get into the kind of the how and how the kind of the techniques that you use produce very different results. I mean, I think that's absolutely fascinating. But if we stay a bit longer on the stakeholders, and again, Francisco, you mentioned who benefits from this, and one figure that has been highlighted in the Urban Night Academy is the mayor of Tirana, Arion Valier, who has been extremely transformational in this space, but on a more selfish level, he believes that working with children is also building a huge support base for what he's trying to do. And he has this amazing quote, if you kind of listen to kids, they see some transformations or change, they'll go to their parents, and it becomes this snowballing effect of we want this or we want that, and it's kind of so you're building social capital through the process, which some politicians love, of course. But it's also interesting. I think if you look at stakeholders that might not necessarily agree with us, right? And to what extent designing streets for kids, and specifically if you're super targeting an audience, might be counter into it. And again, I know, Sylvia, you work in contexts where this has been difficult. And so how do we think this works? And in some cases, and I'll come to you, John, as well, kids act as mediators in very conflicting environments, but in other cases they become not necessarily unified. But let's explore this. Do you want to start?
Yeah, we have been working with children designing a couple of public realm schemes, and that was great. And at the end of the process, we were also engaging with the whole community, and it was an intergenerational workshop in which children were presenting to all the stakeholders their projects, and that went really well. The thing that we thought later on that was we didn't do well was we branded like child-friendly schemes, and when we consulted those projects, we had this reaction from a lot of people saying, why you are listening children and we are not listening us, and in a way they thought that if they will go in the future into that place, there will not space for them. So they, in a way, they thought that maybe they could not get a seat there, and it was just for children, and that was not the intention. The intention really was, co-designing with them and having the town center child friendly. But yeah, we get this thing that I think was more a branding thing. So now these are intergenerational settings, the first rebranding, and now is setting for all ages. So now it's going better, but definitely I'm sure that if we have given them the chance to be more involved in the project, they wouldn't have been, because they didn't want to be more involved. They wanted to have that space, the meaning of the space, for everyone.
Is there a branding problem alone? I mean, I can see what you're saying, and potentially, I'm putting mouths in your word. Are you saying that it may be more helpful to approach this problem through the terminology play streets versus streets for kids? Is it that more inclusive? But is it only kind of branding problem, or do you feel that when the actual engagement happens, that people feel that there are kind of needs that are not being met?
I think it was mainly about the name,
Okay.
because then you talk about the project, and it's like, why is for children? Why do you have engaged with children? If we have been talking about the final outcome, was not the final outcome, it was more about why you have been listening to children and not to us.
Sure.
No, I agree, because the language is super important, and what language do you use to what key stakeholders and when? So we experience that also a lot in Lebanon when we're trying to, we engage kids in all the process, and sometimes now in the project we're working on gender equality, so we're engaging more women and young girls, but when we go to for example, the municipality, we try to use a language where they don't stop our project because we're trying to change things. So sometimes you do the change as more like a advocacy way, but by using the right language that suits them, in a sense, especially if you're working in a place where you're having so many conflicts between different communities, and the way then you design the participatory process. For example, in our experience, we worked in neighborhoods where you have the Lebanese host community, but also displaced Syrian refugees, and they all live in the same neighborhood. They share the public spaces. So by engaging with children from both communities, we were able to also try to tackle the bigger problems. So coming back to your question of conflict of social cohesion and the use of public space by both communities in a positive way. So I think there is a power of engaging children in a way to impact the whole community. Well, if you come to get adults in the same room, let's say, and not super fun activities, usually, just to talk, you get more tension and more tension. While with children, if you use the right tools, you design the process taking into account all these sensitivities, you can really work on the recovery and the healing of the whole community. Obviously, it takes time, but it gives the opportunity to do that.
Francisca, I mean, you have this interesting quote, and it's actually also on our website, Urban 95, where, cities that work for kids work for everyone.
Yeah.
So the first very simple question is, do you really believe that? I mean, I'm always, questioning this from the perspective also for some work that one of our colleagues at LSE Cities has done, engaging teenagers and specifically girls. Julia King has been leading this space. And a lot of the times, we can tailor, and maybe this is the super targeting problem, we can tailor, streets or spaces that might work for 5-year-olds. And then you always ask, where do teenagers go? So how do you tackle this?
So I think that saying that streets that work for kids work for everyone is true. It doesn't mean that all kids have the same needs, right? So I think we do need to recognize not only the ages, but the context of what they're saying. I think you were saying something that's very right. In many places, kids will want a soccer field. In many places. In other places, they won't. Or maybe the teenage girls, maybe somewhere they'll surprise us and the teenage girls wants the soccer field and the teenage boys won't want the soccer field. I have no idea. I just think that we do need to do that work. So it's not generally like all the kids have the same needs. I'm just thinking that if we do engage kids of place, we're probably doing a much better work than if we're just engaging the adults. So we do need to consider the different needs, the context, the different stakeholders. I do believe it.
Okay, very good. Let me just now move to the next part of your presentation, which was about the how. And in the Urban Einstein Academy, we've been very influenced by the work of Tim Gill, who you may know, and he uses this very interesting concept of affordance, which I find fascinating, where mundane street objects become very exciting opportunities for play, right? And I wonder to what extent the approach of how you are engaging kids might produce certain outcomes versus others. And let me tell you a bit about how I think this might be. If you let kids occupy a street as it is today, it's literally occupying, with all our biases of occupying, what we mean by occupying, and just observe what happens, versus doing some of the work that we saw in your slide, which is much more conscious, the puzzles, the engagements. What type of different, and again, here, maybe I'm very narrow-minded, the imaginary capacity of a child versus,
So I'm laughing a little bit because in one of our activities, we actually did use the concept of affordance. And in those images that I showed, I'm pointing, but of the engagement that we did, we actually did give kids imagine like big waste materials, like life-size waste materials, big tubes, some papers and things like that. We put them in a gym at their school and we let them play. And we said, okay, after we discuss streets and their concepts and we let them play and do this. I think it's very different. And of course, we do need to do a mix. As I was saying before, we did wanted to provide the practical things. For each of the activities, we're giving some recommendations. If you have the chance to be outside, to go, this may be some recommendations, but we also do want to acknowledge that many times we don't have that liberty. I think it's very different. It's also, there's a question of interpretation, right? And that's our role. I think it's harder. It's not impossible, but it's harder to interpret those types of activities. If a kid goes and that many of them did like some like little houses.
Yeah.
So I was wondering like, do they want a house on the street? And someone was saying, no, I want to safe
space.
But maybe
Yeah.
that's also something
Yeah.
we interpret because maybe they wanted to tell secrets with their friends or tell dirty jokes or something. It wasn't about safety. So I will say that exactly right. So I really don't know. I think there's like an extra level, an added level. I encourage those type of activities, but I think we do need to try to understand them and like put the extra work.
And I think also what you said, which was fascinating, is focus on behaviors rather than outputs, right? In terms of I want a wall, I want a swing versus
what do you do there?
Yeah, right, and then that kind of opens up different horizons. Yeah.
I agree that it should be a combination, and we've tested a combination of these, like the setup that you're in a kind of classroom setting, or even in the park, working on a piece of paper, but also experiencing a space, and testing it and giving material to change the space on spot, and then monitor and discuss together. So we focus a lot on the experiences. We focus on the stories that come out from these, because we're also testing several tools. Like for every project, we develop like a new tool because we feel like we can get more information and we can understand better. We try to focus on the stories, on the feelings and the experiences in a place. So now maybe 2 weeks ago, we did an activity with teenage girls because that's a focus now. And we did exactly this. Like we first designed a design brief with them. So we did lots of activities that are, focusing on feelings, emotions, experience, participatory mapping. going in the neighborhood, discussing, sharing stories, why they feel this is safe, why this is not. But then once we identified the spaces with them, we decided to test exactly this concept of giving them like the screen to create privacy, because they did say that they wanted to test it. But how do you test it? We also did an activity there, so we decided to eat together. And as we eat together, they started shaping the space. We put music. So we're testing with these tools instead of just telling them, okay, now change the space as you want. And we observe and take pictures, but more we're enjoying, you know, the time together. They have all of these things, chairs that they can move and decide, you know, what they feel about it, and they share their stories about it. So I think it's always like a mix.
I think that's a good technique. Sorry to interrupt, but we also learned that at some points, this is more for smaller kids, but when you're asking them about their drawing, maybe do something else, like be building blocks outside, so they're not, because they're very self-aware too, and many of them will want to impress the new people who came to design the street, right?
Yeah.
So many times we run the risk of them saying what they believe we think we want to hear. So maybe creating some other sort of activity or trust, or like lowering their guards a little bit, does help, like getting the real stories.
Definitely, with young people, you have like more conversations, it's more articulating. However, the challenge is getting the message, because sometimes they are doing like a shopping list, but getting what is more important and being able to translate from all the insight to what the area needs and what's the relevant message they are sending. That's the main challenge, I guess. Yeah.
We have to kind of wrap this section up and open up this for questions. So hopefully there will be questions already, perhaps online or in the room. So please get ready to kind of raise your virtual or real hands. But perhaps I can ask one last question. You don't need to answer it. I'll just put you on the spot. If you were to think of what your favorite open-ended question to a 5-year-old is, to produce interesting results, Sylvia, what would it be?
Yeah, depending the scale of the project, depending.
Depends.
Yeah.
It depends. Okay.
It depends the context. Yeah, I cannot really answer
You
that.
don't have to answer the
But
question. Yes.
I would come back to my recommendation. So giving a lot of information up front to make them really understand what they are doing, and provide them with some background and some vocabulary for them to underpin their opinions. Yeah. So I always do this, and it always works, even if you are doing one-to-one engagement or you are working in a group.
Yeah.
So for me, that's
interesting. Joanna? You
Yeah.
don't have to answer it.
No, I thought about it. So I thought it might not be one question, but more about a story. If the street, let's say, or this building or this bench spoke to you, what would it tell you, and what would you tell it?
Fascinating. Okay, so
So
we can go back to the answers. Yes, I think there's a lot of opportunity there. Yes.
I think mine is much simpler. I really love asking kids what they can or can't do on the streets, and just because I think I've seen so many different results in different cities. So just when cities are near a beach or near something else, and then what I love the most is seeing their reactions when you say, "Can you rest on the street?" "No, you can't." And then you show them a picture of someone lying down in the streets, and they go crazy. They can't believe it, and they're like, just seeing their reactions to the different activities, I think it's amazing. So it's two ways, right? You learn about what they see, and you also show them the possibilities that the streets can have.
This makes a lot of sense. Okay, let's open this up to the audience. You don't have to wait for a roving microphone. Apparently, this room has amazing microphones that are recording us all the time. So perhaps we can take bundles of 3 questions to our participants. And please choose whichever question you want to answer, right? So whichever you feel more comfortable. Who would like to Dimitrio from Milan?
Thanks for the presentations, really impressive. But I have a question which is not related to kids, but to caregivers. About
Caregivers.
about how to engage caregivers with the lens of the children, because we are doing of course, we are used to do more engagement with the caregivers than with the children. But sometimes I feel that it's completely disconnection among the role of caregiver and the role of citizen. And maybe we can reconstruct this connection through the engagement, not only engaging kids directly, but also trying to make them thinking while engaging with the lens of their children.
Thank you very much. Let's get another question. Yes, the person with that.
On the same topic of caregivers, one of the major comments or questions that we've heard when designing places for play for kids is parents. Where do they stay? How can we also include them in the design process while they wait for their kids to play or finish playing? And how, my question is, if you've ever had an opportunity to work along these lines and negotiate this relation between caregivers and kids while designing places for them.
Thank you very much. And one more, yes.
Hi, thank you for the presentation and the insightful conversation. Two questions maybe, really quick. I'm curious to know the age group that you usually engage. And maybe the other question is for Joanna, because I'm from Jordan and I think we have a lot of similarities in terms of context. What resources do you utilize to make it affordable while thinking of host communities or making space for kids in these host communities, to make it maybe just to utilize the resources, the budget that we have in the best way that we can?
So doing this, but with limited budgets in some of the contexts that you're working. Okay, so I have very interesting questions. How do you gauge caregivers with the lens of young children? Follow up around parents and where they would stay, for example, and the different age groups that you have traditionally engaged with, and specifically a question for you, Joanna, on the context on working with limited resources. So who would like to start? Joanna, go ahead.
Okay, so I think an example could be from Urban 95 of the lens, like a very practical tool. Didn't you do the one where you put the periscope? I think that was a very cool and like practical idea to let the parents see like this is a practical one on seeing kids' experiences. But I think I will answer to both of you about engaging parents and children. I think when you engage children, you definitely engage also the caregivers. And in our experience, when we engage children, we outreach to do the activities also with the parents. So there's a lot of conversation also on the project from the beginning with the caregivers. And I think getting them to come sometimes and engage in an activity with the children can be helpful. So when we did the activities for younger than 5-year-old, we developed like an activity where the parent actually, we asked them to play a role as a kind of facilitator as well with us for the children's activity. Because when they're like 3 years old, we found it's very challenging to also get them to draw or like speak and express. So we tried different mediums, but the caregiver played the role. So I think when you give them a role in the activity and making sure as a lead facilitator that they're not imposing their thoughts. So like, oh, look, my child did this, but more like on a conversation basis, I think that helps. And what Dina said about the spaces for children, you must really take into account spaces for parents. That's a very important point, that even when you're designing spaces for children, with children, we should always take into account and consider and engage the caregivers in understanding their own uses of the spaces that we're designing, because exactly like a parent would want to sit, we found in our project that they like to literally be very close and watch where their kids are playing. So the proximity, even if it's a street now with the project for teenage girls, proximity is the most important, that from the balcony they can see them. So the proximity was important, but also in a park, the function and the uses, which go back to what you were saying about space for everyone, because a parent will bring their child to the park, so they need a space to sit. And for maximizing resources, you know, in Lebanon, like, there is one thing to maximize the resources, to also do participation. Our biggest challenge is to do more participation in Lebanon, because usually they don't or rarely fund the participatory approach. There is funding for building, but not for the participation.
I'm just gonna add to that, also not only about the budget, but the
Okay.
actual resources that you have to make the playground or the space. Like, for example, this area is known for some sort of trees that it is available that we can use. I'm just trying to think of the actual material resources
design.
available for designing the
Okay,
spaces.
so the way we try to go in order to ensure that we're doing something that would last is to use actually materials that are that could last a long time without any maintenance, because our municipalities don't do any maintenance, and it's up to the people sometimes to take care of the spaces. So we try as much as possible to even over-engineer whatever we're doing as interventions, and in order to reduce the maintenance cost or how much they need to maintain them. So that's how we've been doing it in Lebanon, specifically for the streets and those spaces and public parks. If it's inside the school, it's quite different because they might have a budget.
Francisca, perhaps you can choose one of the questions if you get more.
Yeah, of course. So I was thinking a little bit about the caregivers, and you started talking about it a bit, and how important it is depending on the age group. So, for example, if you have 0 to 3 and you have babies, you really want to engage the caregivers, observe them. If you have small kids, maybe they will help you facilitate the activities, they can help you with the trust. But if they're 12, maybe they don't want their caregivers anywhere around, right? They want independence, they want to be alone. So I think just considering like the different phases of where to engage them, and for caregivers, really making it easy for them, meeting them where they are, going to the school, pick up, drop off, not maybe adding another meeting after school where they have to organize, get caregivers.
Get to them.
Exactly, yeah.
So,
Yes, in terms of caregivers, it is also really important that the area has shading, has some greenery to provide shade, benches, but also another important thing is that it's just not for 0 to 5 or 5 to 8. So you can have, if you have 2 or 3 children, they can be in the same space and you can be having a look to all of them. Sometimes, you have this problem that you have to go with 2 of them or 3 in one place, then taking all to the other. So
I can sympathize.
it's very important to think about the practicalities,
Let's go on and see if there are any questions that we can cluster, maybe 3 topics or questions.
Okay, so we have a lot of questions coming from our online audience. Alejandra Ramirez is in Colombia, and she wants to know about the sustainability of projects. So she's saying, once the public space has been transformed, what's your approach to maintaining the public space, which you kind of keep up to a bit in your last answer, Joanna? We don't have too many questions along really similar lines, but there's a few other ones that are interesting here. Elisa Lima, who is in Guatemala City, is wondering how to engage local governments to prioritize public transformation projects focused on kids more broadly. And I'll just find one more. This is actually a bit more specific for you, Francisca, but maybe everyone else has an idea as well. Evangelia Siskaki, I'm not sure where she is, would like to know more about what phase of a project would you usually engage kids in? So would you first approach communities and parents and kids to get input, or do you approach them after you organize the project with a partner and you're already kind of ready to move forward?
Thank you very much. Again, some fascinating questions, the sustainability of projects and making sure that these are maintained so kids don't get really upset that things don't work to their dreams. local government, perhaps, Sylvia, you can pick this up. How do you gauge local government to actually invest in this? Potentially, you've had some battles or sweated over this question in Waltham Forest. And finally, the phase of the project, and what phase is most relevant? Sylvia, let's start with you.
Yeah, great. I think in our case, the child-friendly approach was very instrumental to get the funding. So I guess, as I said before, when we were engaging with families, sometimes was not helping us, but in terms of engaging with central government, that really was really important to get this message across. Because the area in which we are investing this funding is a suburban area, so it means that children are driven everywhere. And during the pandemic, they were very stuck at home, and that was a really important issue in terms of mental health for teenagers. So also we have some, the obesity is quite high. So we had several things that putting all together with the child-friendly approach really helped us to get.
So that built momentum internally.
Yes.
That this has to be prioritized. But on the question of you could respond to this and do these projects for the kids rather than with the kids. So why invest? What in Waltham Forest? What did people? Were they with you, or from the beginning, saying, "No, we actually need to kind of engage in this way"?
Yes, I think it was definitely being part of the Urban 95 program and having our mayor with us here was completely instrumental to inside our organization or project gain a lot of momentum. And what was initially was just a project. We aim at immediately after this program to have a bigger aim, to have all the North child friendly. So definitely it was really.
Sylvia, thank you for promoting the program.
Yeah.
It's applied. That's one of the messages. Francisca.
So obviously, I think the more obvious answer would be to go with site analysis at the beginning of the project. So if you start with the needs of the kids at the beginning of the project, maybe you can do it successful, have a successful outcome at the end. I will say that I wouldn't be discouraged if you haven't done this. I think there are many other instances in the project where it would be valuable to get kids' feedback, even if you already have the design. I'm gonna go with something you're saying. I think visualizing is very important. So maybe for your case, it was the Urban 95 Academy that visualized it. But sometimes the actual implementation process is a way to visualize to kids, to caregivers, to families, how the street can be different, how they can be involved, how the space can move. So again, I think ideally we do it from the beginning and we do it multiple times and we'll continue engaging kids. But I do think that there are different opportunities at different places.
Yeah, I would answer about the phase, like when do we engage the kids? What we learned and what I think should be the case, you shouldn't engage unless you know you can do the project, so you have the funding. Otherwise, you really you lose the trust of the community and the children as a whole, and this impacts the whole participatory process and the relationship with the kids. If you have the budget to engage in all the phases from the idea, selection, design, implementation, and even activation, which we've been trying to focus a lot on in the public space. So after you finish, to actually also use the space as part of the project to fund activities, I think it's super important that they see the project from the beginning to the end, and that's what creates the biggest sense of ownership and belonging to the spaces.
Okay, thank you. Let's get another round of questions. So, yes, Natalia, then this person, and then this person. Go ahead.
I just would like to know more about if you have any evidence to see the long-term benefits of engaging with children in an early stage to have more participation in the city. So I'll say something very interesting about this for governments. This building that social capital, and this question is more about how to convince governments to invest with children, so children have to be part and have an active voice at long time. So do you have evidence that shows that how children care about the space, how they can engage later in the government, in adulthood or something, or it's too soon for you to know the impact in the long term?
Thank you. Very clear question. Yes.
Thank you for this insightful dialogue. I have a twofold question. We're talking about urban infrastructure which ensures child friendliness. My sort of question is on the different types of spaces where children would be interacting with each other. For example, primary schools or health centers or gardens and parks, which sort of ensures that that particular space has a particular intent of engagement between the children. So how would sort of your interaction or the approach towards design differ basis the place where the children should be interacting? That would be my first question. The second question would be slightly on the inclusion angle. We are talking about different geographies and contexts as well, where different sorts of people from backgrounds, socioeconomic backgrounds, religion, gender sort of would be interacting with the space. And design being an overarching sort of concept, how would we sort of incorporate these dynamics?
Thank you. And yeah.
Just I was thinking about the projects that we saw in the presentations before, and if we are thinking to do some intervention on our streets, is it the right way to keep our kids playing or spending more time beside the streets where they can expose to car emissions and not affecting their health? So I don't know, it is, if you consider this or think about it.
Thank you. So again, very interesting questions. Evidence on the long-term benefits of engaging with kids, kind of building more critical citizens, perhaps active citizens.
More active, inspiring their future. Some of them can become architects or
So not consumers of space, but maybe active. The urban infrastructure question on does your approach vary in terms of the different types of spaces that you're engaging in, if it's gardens, parks, or schools, and also the inclusionary aspects. How do you deal with the methods and the approaches when you're dealing with the context of religion, gender, and the final question more around how does your approach change when it comes to difficult areas, like when you're dealing with cars or emissions, and how do you put this together? Who would like to get us started? Okay, Joanna and then Sylvia.
So it's $1 million question because there is no real evidence or literature that proves the importance of participation of children, because we have done like lots of research to try to find the actual proof numeric, but I think you would need to come back to speak to the same children after 10 years, and we did not find that. It's anecdotal evidence from like stories they tell you, or for example, in a community that we've been working with for like more than 3-4 years consecutive, we sense it, but there's no proofs, didn't find any research. And actually I added this specific question that there's a gap in the literature on measuring the impact on the children themselves if they participate in this process. And I think it's for all of the PhD students and the researchers to keep that in mind, because it is a big gap, and it actually would be amazing if we can try to research it.
If anyone is interested in setting up a cohort study, reach out to Joanna. It's a very interesting project. Very interesting.
If I can add maybe to that, about the kids, we also think city governments, right? Like, how do we convince other city governments that this is the right path to go? And I agree. I mean, I would be lying if I said like we have a great research with, but I do think that anecdotes can speak loudly. So if all of you in this room are doing kids engagement, and this is a little bit what I was asking for, if you have had outcomes, if you had a usage, maybe you were dealing with a difficult part of your project and kids engagement helped you decide something, turn an outcome of the project. I think that does speak loudly. So hopefully in this room and more, we can start putting that together while we gather the evidence that is more long-term.
Sylvia.
For example, now we have commissioned a mural, and we haven't done engagement with children, we have just done engagement with adults, because the mural is going to be including references about the past of the area. But for example, now we are planning to have a workshop with the students, so we are going to discuss with them the references we are including there. And so it will be like an history lesson for them. So there are different ways to engage with them. It doesn't need to be they deciding. That you can harness the opportunity to show them what they are being done and learn about the area. So I guess it's just not them deciding, it's them being part.
There's further anecdotal evidence, again, from the mayor of Tirana. So he started this practice of opening up City Hall to every single classroom in Tirana, meeting him every Friday. I'm not sure what's happened. I mean, obviously it's been 10 years. Maybe they're going to start voting for him, but that's one way. Who wants to kind of engage with the other?
I can go with the streets question, because it reminded me actually of a session we were having with one of our Urban 85 Academy cities this week. And they were asking us, can we put play elements in the middle of the street? They were just starting to redesign. And I was like, a little bit, of course, it would be great to have them in the middle of the street, but can you create the right conditions for kids to live in the middle of the streets, and why do you want to do it? So I think I'd start with saying, obviously, safety first. Let's meet the basic needs, not be too unrealistic, that we do need to create the safe environments. But I wanted to mention that there actually is evidence around air quality. For example, when we close the streets to cars at pickup and drop off, or for play streets, there is some evidence that says that air quality does improve, even if they're closed for a couple of hours.
Sure.
It does get better. So I think we can look at that and like creating the right environment, but there are some things that we need to create these environments without changing the street in itself from the thankfully.
And I think also in relation to that question, it depends highly on the street users in each neighbor, in each country, the culture of using streets. So I'm sure like the examples came from the specific context of how usually people already use the street, because in some contexts, everyone uses the street also for social engagement. In others, like you don't feel, communities might not feel comfortable being on the street, or it's a threat. Actually, so of course, like the understanding the context and the uses and the risk and everything is super important.
Thank you.
Is it possible to add to it?
Of course, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I just wanted to clear out that with a participatory approach, you're not actually inviting children to come use the streets. You're enhancing places they already use. So it's not like we're looking at streets that with high emissions and we're telling children like come and play. It's we're looking at spaces that they are already using, and we're trying to create a safer environment for them to play with. So sorry, I just wanted.
Thank you. Let's see if there are any questions online, and perhaps we can go back to our colleague's question around aspects of inclusivity. We'll bundle that as well. Katie, other questions?
There are a couple more questions here. Maria Truno, who is in Barcelona, would like to know, how do you suggest moving from specific projects engaging with children to a systematic public policy taking into account the diversity of childhood needs?
Okay.
Which is a bit more practical, from Lindsay, who is with the Institute for Transportation and Development Policy in New York. And she would like to know, for you, Francisca, but again, maybe for others as well, have you had difficulty in engaging kids over longer initiatives, or the projects you're showing in your examples typically short-term engagements?
Very interesting. Yeah. No, thank you.
There's just one further part of her question, about the challenges around engaging youth in longer term engagement of research, especially children from marginalized groups.
Maybe we can tie this to our colleagues' question around, how the kind of approach changes with certain groups. And so this IPDD question is actually quite
quite interesting. Attached to that is the length of the engagement. Have you seen that, you know, this process can be prolonged? And then the other question we have more about, can we systematize this in public policy terms rather than just doing it from one place to the other? Why is it only Waltham Forest in London? Right?
Yeah, maybe I can make it one.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if the projects are related to them, so like playgrounds or parks, they should be into policy, that they should be required to have them involved, and especially local schools. Yeah, maybe, yeah, not for big developments, but for projects that are directly maybe the users should be like included as a requirement.
Okay, that will be very popular with certain stakeholders trying to build quickly, but interesting, yeah. Joanna?
I will answer about the difficulties of engaging with children for a long term. I think it's very important if we can do that. The challenges we face is that we've worked in vulnerable contexts, so with displaced communities, so refugees that might leave, or they're looking forward to going back home, or there's like, the situation is very unstable that you're trying to build on gaining the trust, and then but there's like this instability. It is a challenge, but it doesn't mean that we should not engage them, because even if some children are there for a temporary time, actually engaging them can be very positive for them, because they've been witnessing displacement. So maybe only the setup of engaging with the children, coming to this space, meeting other children actually has multiple benefits. So it goes beyond the built intervention that you're doing that they might not even get the chance to use, like the playground or the street itself. But the process of engagement, this is the most beneficial to try to keep. And in order to make sure you engage like the children, let's put aside the challenges of, you know, the length of displacement and all of that. I think creating incentives, especially when working with youth and teenagers, incentive is super important to really like make sure that fun activities, that you're listening to them in the design of the activities, that would ensure that there's no, let's say, drop out of the program that you're developing because they have shaped it. So that's a way to mitigate this challenge.
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm with you. I think that obviously we can engage them for longer periods of time. There are some organizations doing that. There's Humankind in India, for example. They do an amazing job engaging kids. They have a full curriculum. I think Wasipitanga in Ecuador also does some work following up with kids. We've talked to some municipalities who actually create a council of kids to ask things to them. So we really do encourage those things, but I want to say that if you don't have the capacity to do that, even in one session, as you're saying, one engagement, let's start with that. Let's start with convincing one people in your staff to do one engagement and see what happens with that. And I think with that, we can call it a win for today.
We need to bring this to a close, but I really like the ambition that we're closing this, right? You kind of create this children's citizen assemblies, 5-year-olds, you know, influencing our politics, and rightly so. Can we all thank our three participants today? Sylvia, thank you very much, Joanna, and Francisca, for your time. And as I said, please reach out. The publication will be available soon at the end of December. Please influence it, even the color design of the front page. And please relog into the LSE events website if you want to see the recording of this event. So thank you very much again.